Once again, a very warm welcome to the program. This is the Morning Call. I am Nyasha K. Mutizo. Now we kick off the show in Cameroon, where its international partners, including France and the United Nations, have condemned last week's killings of 23 villagers in a troubled English-speaking region. The incident on Friday took place in an area where armed separatists are campaigning for independence from the rest of Cameroon, which is majority French-speaking. More than 3,000 people have died and at least 700,000 have fled their homes in the nearly 29-month-old conflict. In addition, the Central African nation is also facing a Boko Haram insurgency in the far north.
There's an upsurge in armed attacks in Cameroon's far north region, security officials said. The village of Uzal is the target of a spate of Boko Haram attacks this week, which left 3 civilians dead.
Everything was burned. The consulting room, the pharmacy, the head office, and the treatment room, excluding the hospital ward. We're losing lives, losing brothers, we're losing mothers. Every day we're in mourning. You see how houses are burned, goats are burned, property and people. We couldn't figure out the final toll. We built our health center and we suffered for it. People worked, people struggled.
Military sources told AFP that 4 other locations have been hit within the same period. They include Mandusa, Udal, Kuva and Hitere in Cameroon's far north region. A police officer who spoke on condition of anonymity said 3 children have been missing since the attack. The attackers also looted shops. On Tuesday, the United Nations called on the Cameroonian government to undertake an impartial and independent probe into the death of 23 people in the English-speaking region during a military operation.
According to the spokesperson for the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, the attack is a shocking episode in the crisis that has plagued the northwest and southwest regions of the country for the past 3 years. The organization urges Cameroonian authorities to take concrete measures to protect the rights of people throughout the country and to conduct a full, independent and impartial investigation whose findings must be made public. So far, there are differing accounts of the attack, with some opposition parties and local NGOs accusing elements of the army of killing villagers. The Cameroonian army denies this and refers to it as an unfortunate accident.
And we are joined now by a Cameroon researcher at Amnesty International, Fabien Offner, and he is joining us from Dakar in Senegal. A very good morning to you. Now, a few months ago, Amnesty International warned about the recurrence of abuses by the army in the English-speaking region. So isn't this news of the killings in the Ntombo village exactly what you were warning against?
Indeed, what we were told was that in the run-up to the legislative elections which took place on February 9th, there was a reinforcement of the military presence in the 2 regions of the northwest and southwest. And these military operations have led to significant violence, and we have been able to talk about only a small part of it, as it seems to have been so widespread and numerous. But what we have shown is that the Cameroonian army was guilty of killing civilians and also of destroying houses, which we have also been able to show by satellite images. Unfortunately, the tragedy in Gabou has confirmed this escalation in violence, particularly on the part of the Cameroonian army, even though the violence by separatists has obviously continued for many months. There are diverging accounts between the authorities and non-government organizations. Does this justify the call for an independent inquiry launched by the UN and the US? Following what happened in Gabon, we can only call for an independent inquiry, as the UN and the US have requested. Since the real problem in the present situation is that there is a lot of propaganda on both sides, both on the side of the authorities and on the side of the separatists. It is very difficult to untangle what's true from what's false. What is certain is that with regard to what happened in Gabon, there have been two communiques from the government, and The first, which acknowledged that elements of the defense and security forces were present there on February 14th, the day of the tragedy. A second communique explains that the defense and security forces were present, but on the 15th. So there are certain contradictions that necessarily encourage suspicion that those responsible are elements of the Cameroonian security force. For the moment, we have no information that allows us to say this, but given the violence committed by the army in recent weeks and the way things are going, it is obviously conceivable. To remove any doubt, it would be helpful to accept an independent fact-finding mission. The question is whether the government of Cameroon is ready to accept that, knowing that there have been reports that United Nations employees have been denied access to the same locality by Cameroonian authorities.
So the United Nations and the United States have demanded an independent inquiry into the killings, but it seems for Amnesty International this simple request isn't enough.
What we have observed is that the international community is very, very discreet. In recent days, there have indeed been some welcome appeals from the UN, which has called for independent fact-finding missions. But unfortunately, this is still insufficient. The scale of the emergency is extreme. We had hoped at one point that the national dialogue would lead to positive results, but unfortunately, that is not the case at all. Violence by the Cameroonian army has intensified in recent weeks, and alongside that, there is still the issue of detainees, which is less talked about. We still have dozens of detainees who were arrested in relation to the Anglophone crisis and are in prison in Douala, in Yaoundé, Bamenda, and elsewhere. And for a large number of them, these are arrests, detentions that are undoubtedly arbitrary, as shown by the symbolic case of the leader of the Pacific protest, who was deemed arbitrary by the UN Working Group on arbitrary detention and called for his release.